All right, let's continue on with the quick overview. Okay, so on this one, I really like the choice of color because I think that ties in nicely with the Mario piece. What I would do though is probably shrink this down and maybe align this up because this looks like it's off center from here. Maybe even bleed the photo all the way out to the edge on both sides so that it gets a little bit larger, and then maybe use like a dark blue or something on the text that's here. For your subheadings, what I'd recommend is see if there's a way that you can get them all on just two lines, or if possible on a single line. With this one, since it's a longer name, because I know Nintendo is a really long word, it's trickier to get that on there. But with these, so you've got two lines, 3 lines. It makes it a little bit less consistent. And then, yeah, I would play around again. You can bleed these out beyond the edge of the pink line that's there to be able to add a little bit of weight to the photos. Okay, so with this, I really like the look of this. It definitely looks like an ad or something that you would see in a magazine. For something like this, what you may want to do is see if there's a way to make this stand out a little bit more from the background. I like that you put this over an area that there's better contrast on, but once it gets over to this side, it gets a little bit trickier to read. So I don't know if it's doing like a drop shadow or maybe a light, low opaque color bar or something behind there to help make that pop off the background even more. I like the columns of text and stuff that are here. You could play around with, instead of having this gap in between here, you could have them touch each other. So it's okay to have that go into the gutter and then maybe utilize some kind of color from here as a background behind those. That could be something to make that pop out a little bit. You can even do the same thing with having the picture bleed up beyond the edge of that margin. You've got nice use of the drop cap. I like the italic that's on that. The pull quote looks good. I'd probably shrink down the size of your folio. It's pretty big. And then on this side, what I'd recommend is you've got your 3-column setup here for text, and then this switches to 2-column. I would switch this to 3 or switch this to 2 so that you're consistent going across all of the columns on that spread. All right, love this opening image. I think this works really well. This area right here, though, what I would want to do is have that fade out into this color. If you need help with that, let me know. There's a way inside of here. I'll just do one real quick for you. I'm just going to place a random picture in here. But what you could do with something like this is there are some effects. They're not the best, but there are some effects that are in here. I'm going to do this gradient feather. So under Object, Effect, Gradient Feather, I'm going to click Preview. What this is going to do is it's going to show you it's fading out to transparency. That's what this gradient ramp is doing. So if I bring this over, see how it's barely fading out? Or if I go all the way over this way, now it's got that edge. You can flip it so it's going the opposite way. So I just did this little reverse. And you can play around with where that ends up fading. But what that allows you to do is it allows you to take a photo and then have the photo bleed into the color that you put in there for InDesign. So see how it's kind of fading out slightly. You don't want it to fade out a ton there, but just enough so it doesn't look like there's a straight cutoff and a color difference between this side and that side. Again, love that image. You may even play around. I like the contrast that you've done with this. You experiment even more with some of the title. Over on this side, really like a lot of the stuff you've got going here. Really nice color scheme. Maybe incorporating this darker brown that's here as a backdrop or as strokes around the text, around the photos or something, just to add some more contrast to that. Or maybe it's putting the color bar down here at the bottom. So it's like a reverse of what you had on the cover. So, or on the opening, you had this light color and the dark color background. Now you're using the light color. Then you've got that as your dark color in the background. Something to kind of play around with. Really love your images and stuff that you used here. I think your color scheme works really nicely. The stuff looks good there. A couple of things that I would play around with just to experiment with a little bit is where the text meets here. First off, I love that font. That font's beautiful. Tuck that in so that the N is not actually touching the L that's there. And then what you may want to do is, instead of doing this as a heading for every single one of these, maybe only include like 2, maybe 3 throughout the entire spread. Right now, because they're separated, my eye is bouncing just to those columns of text as opposed to one long article. See how these are separated, just having a couple pieces. Here, it makes it feel almost like it's an interview. Like this is like the question and then the answer, question, answer. So I would trim those down just a little bit. And then with this part here where the text is showing up by itself, play around with the length of the column so that you don't end with just one word. You're going to want to pull that up somehow. And that might just be playing around with the styling. Okay, so here, first thing is, yeah, it's tough for me to tell because the lines and stuff are in the way. So I definitely make sure that when you export it, that you export it in preview mode. Or not the export, when you do the screenshot, I want it in preview mode. Okay, so I like the strong image. I think that works really well. I think the text could use some work. Maybe it's water in here. Maybe it's a fish. Maybe it's pulling the stuff together. That gap is really, really large. You want to play around with doing some contrast possibly with this and incorporating some part of the color. On these with the photos themselves do not have to stop at the margin, just like you did here where you bled it all the way to the edge. Having that bleed out might be a way to eliminate this kind of outside white border that's happening. That might be a little bit more interesting. And then check your font size. I think the font size might be a little too big. With your font size shouldn't be maybe larger than 9 or 10 points. And then see what you can do once you start to incorporate your pull quote there. I'll be interested to see what that looks like. Really like a lot of the stuff you've got going on here. I think this imagery is really strong. The line difference, though, I'm not sure. You'd have to explain to me what your thought was on making this one thicker and this one thinner. So I'd want to play around with that a little bit. Maybe pulling this in so you've got this big amount of space here. What you may want to do is fit the word pandemic cookbook so that it fills more this area as opposed to being really, really tight up into that corner. Because see how it leaves this negative edge. I think being able to kind of cheat it in slightly, that would help to cover it in. You might even have that pink line go on top of the photo slightly just to unify those two pieces. Just a possibility. I like the images that you've chosen. You've got really strong, nice, clean, consistent images. I'd probably reduce the size of the folio a little bit, the slice and dice, and then definitely watch the video that shows you how to make sure that your page numbers are on the master page so that they change. Because right now you've got 4 pages in the magazine that are all on page 15. All right, really like what you did with this piece here. What I may want to do is flip the image so she's looking at the title. So you can reverse it. If you go here, you can do transform and you can do flip horizontal. And what that will do is that will have her facing inward. So you'd have something here. I'll just do one real quick. So doing something like this, what that does is it draws, her eyes are looking towards the title. So just kind of, your eyes are going to follow other people's eyes. So that might be a way to fix that. The other way to do it would be just to flip the entire image or the entire spread so that this is on the left and she's on the right. Something to play around with. So I like the stuff that's happening here with that line. Let me fix this part here. You got some really good images and stuff. What you may want to do is instead of using the black for the headings or the subheadings, maybe use this dark version of the color that she has on her shirt or the color that you used on the title. And then I would play around with not having the subheading down here all by itself. Pull that up and maybe put it up here at the top or move this one up. Just move this one so it's not kind of floating all by itself. All right, so you've got some good symmetry and stuff that are happening here. I like what you've done with the colors to separate these two sides out. And I like the consistency and stuff that you've used here. One of the things that gets a little tricky is right here where you've got double pull quotes and double columns. So it's almost a little too symmetrical because it's like an even balance between the two. What you may consider doing is shrinking this down or bleeding this across or doing something so that it's not quite as perfectly symmetrical on that, just to have a little bit more of a visual impact. That stuff looks good there. You may even experiment with maybe pulling these a little bit tighter so they're not quite all the way to the edge. Maybe you can see how you've got this amount of space between the text and the image here. You may want to consider doing the same kind of thing over on this side. And across the top here, and across the bottom. And then do that consistently for both sides. So whatever amount of space that you're having, utilize that same amount of space on each side. So that way you'll have a nice even amount of space. You could even experiment a bit if you wanted to bleed that color all the way to the bottom. You do something like that where it gives you a little bit more weight at the bottom. Then you may want to duplicate this page and you could experiment with it and maybe play around. I don't know. This is just something I would tweak with a little bit. Break up the symmetry a little bit. Maybe you put this up at the top and those shifted down, this one at the bottom and those up here. I don't know, just something to kind of play around with. But a lot of it, you've got really good solid pieces. Now it's just a matter of experimenting and trying to push it to strengthen it even more. Really like the title that you've got here. I think that works really nice. You might want to pull these a little bit closer together so it's not as separated. I think that works. You may consider bleeding the blue line all the way over, or at least bridging the gap just a little bit between here so it's not quite as symmetrical, just so the eye kind of leads into the next photo. And then I probably want to reduce this down quite a bit. Using website addresses that are in here are really, really distracting, just because there's so many odd characters and dashes and lines and other things like that. So maybe shrinking this down or figuring out what website this is actually from, because you could just put, from what is that, Miami Herald, or look at the Calgary Herald, or look at the Calgary Herald, that site, and find out who actually wrote the article and put byline underneath. With these, the borders get a little funky. It really pushes all of the text inward. You may want to lean away from that. And if you're going to use this color box here, you may actually consider putting it all the way across and have it bleed all the way to the outside and have that stuff on the inside. Right now, by having the white, you've got this really heavy white border. Also, you're going to need to include the name of the magazine, and I'd recommend when you're doing the page numbers that you put the page numbers to the outside and then the name of the magazine on the inside part. All right. Really like the strong image. I think that works really nice. I like the crystals piece here. I think the color scheme looks really good. I like how you've incorporated some kind of graphic in the background behind the pull quote. I think that works really nice. You may want to play around with pulling the subheadings a little bit closer to the article that it's connected to, because right now, since there's an even amount of space, it visually is difficult to tell, is that ending the paragraph or is that beginning the paragraph? So I would recommend reduce the gap that's between here. Check out the video that I made about how to do the after or before line spacing. And if you need help with that, just let me know. All right, really like what you did with the background here. I think this is a fun font. The thing you may experiment with is, in order to bridge the gap between the text and the text that's here, so between hysteric glamour and the text here, is maybe if you were to stop the photo of the logos like up there. I don't know if this makes sense or not, but basically what I'm looking at is trying to figure out a way to be able to have just the bottom portion of this imagine this picture only fitting inside of this box and then having that gap below. In fact, you could even play around with moving that entire picture down so that you have white up here, the actual graphic inside, and then just the little just bottom portion of those letters going into the white area. Let me know if that doesn't make sense, but what I'm looking at is just having it where the bottom portion of the words bridge the gap between the photo that's here. Sorry, clicking and talking and stuff. Where the photo is here, and then having the words actually come into the white slightly. Something to kind of experiment with. You could even, like I mentioned with this part here, if this was moved down, and I can't move it down because I don't have the original photo. Let's see, by having that not go all the way up to the top, instead of it looking like an upside down L, it's now got the photo, this lining directly up with the person's face, definitely connects them still, but then also has this white to balance off of the white that's below. For this side, like some of the graphics and stuff that you have going on here, I think the pull quote's the thing that needs the most work. It's so heavy and strong with the dark color that it's drawing a lot of attention. And then once you have this straight line that's happening here and the straight line for the center of the page, it makes this feel like it's just locked in place. So I want to play around with that a little bit to see if there's a way to make that stand out a little bit more, maybe incorporating some of the color, maybe incorporating some of the color here, but just really playing around a little bit more with that particular edge. Okay, so great images. I love the Call of Duty images. What I'd recommend, though, is bleed the photo all the way, whoops, wrong one. Bleed the photo all the way out, because right here you've got a little bit of space. You've got it bleeding to one edge, but then you've got this big gap over here. If you're going to have that anchor the top portion of your image, have it run all the way across so it fills up that entire space. And then I would pull the text away from that a little bit. Also pull the text a little bit away from here, so you've got a little bit more of a gap between the photo and the text that's there. This pull quote's super hard to read that's on here, so you may want to figure out a different place to put that. You're going to need the folios and stuff here. You may consider reducing the amount of text that you have here, and I would change the headings so that they're not as long. Right here, you've got really super long. This one's 4 lines long. This one's 3 lines long. That one's 2 lines long. That's a single line. There's just too much inconsistency in the length of the lines. I definitely reduce the amount of text, and you can reword them in any way that you want, but just reduce them. And then here with your title, I think the title definitely needs some work. The Call of Duty itself is such an aggressive, heavy, intense kind of game that's got this like really strong kind of feel. And then the font for Cold War is just a really soft, kind of bubbly, looks like it belongs in like a Hello Kitty or some kind of like Nintendo game type of thing. Also, check your capitalization. I'm not sure why you've got capital for of, but then lowercase for duty. Maybe pull some of those colors and utilize those for some of the headings. Kind of choose which color do you want to have as the contrast, so it's not just black and white. Okay, I think that's enough for this one. I'll continue the rest of these in the next video.